Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. You're here with me. We're looking at life through a biblical lens. Tonight we're going to talk about the culture war. I know, nobody's got any guns out. It's not that kind of a war. According to the United Nations, children have rights in criminal law. They have rights in inheriting money. Even an unborn child has rights, sometimes, separate from his or her mother. According to Austin Roos, Center for Family and Human Rights president, who says one wonders if this isn't what the British court is using to insist that Charlie Gard die, despite his parents' wishes. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children took effect in 1990. While most nations of the world signed on, the United States never did. The main reason the United States has never ratified that convention is the same reason the U.S. has never ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, nor the Convention on Persons with Disabilities, and so on and so forth. All of these are simply treaties designed to take precedent over national law. You know, the UN is trying to become the world government. And there are monitors everywhere. You sign on to these things, they send people in to watch what you're doing. And they're just looking for anything to justify their existence. What rights do children really have? Well, it's fairly simple. Children are free from that which would damage, stun, otherwise hinder that child from growing up in what we would call a normal manner. They should expect that. It also includes feeding the child, keeping them clean and safe, educating them, training them for life, fashioning their value system, introducing them to their God. But we don't do any of that. Well, we might feed them. But we have a large percentage of children running around this country who are not eating right. Nobody's out there to keep them safe and clean. Nobody's making sure they get educated. Certainly no one's training them for life and fashioning their value system in a positive way and introducing them to their God. I don't see any of that happening. Did you notice how many of these UN and most parents, how many of these things they don't believe is necessary or even important? You can't raise a child to be charactered, spiritual, and educated according to his or her ability and be in conformity with the UN policy. Why? Because such a child would not need the UN. Such a child would not need a welfare board. Such a child would not need an employment agency or Medicaid. They wouldn't be spending all their money on counseling or therapy. But we can't have that, can we? We can't raise a whole generation of people who don't need the services. As good little socialists, we must need the government. And that's the bottom line today. Here's a weird case in point. Fertility researchers in Great Britain are, quote, working on womb transplant procedures, end of quote, that would theoretically allow any man to have a baby. That said, why would any man want that? Even a lot of women don't want that. But they want baby Charlie to die, don't they? And they want him to die now. Moreover, National Health Service doctors told the British newspaper called the Mail on Sunday that taxpayers should fund such transplants, citing, quote, equality enshrined in law, end of quote. Doctors, somebody I can't pronounce, of Liverpool University said that such a transplant procedure is a real possibility and explained that it could help not only transgender women have children, that's guys who think they're girls, but also gay and straight men who wanted to experience the joys of carrying a child. Yeah. Body weight, water gain, backache, cramps, varicose veins. Yeah. Do you know how sick all this is? It's something right out of a movie about Sodom and Gomorrah. So if a man had a womb transplant and still wanted to be known as a man, what would be the proper way to identify that person? With gender fluidity becoming a major trend in our society and the lines between male and female being increasingly blurred, there's no telling what we would be forced to call these people. Currently, I don't know anyone going through this transition. But if I did, I'm sure I would try to be as polite as possible and probably not refer to this person in terms of any gender-specific pronoun. However, if I had to work with somebody like this, it would probably be his or her desired name that I would use. Or maybe, hey you. I talk to co-workers all the time, and some of them I don't know their name, and others I don't call their name ever. But I don't really know what I would do or what I would say. Do you? Fashion designers are now putting out dresses and skirts and 8-inch heels for men. The U.S. military under Obama policy is having to deal with these issues. And it's all now in a state of flux because Trump is delaying the transition. Good on him. According to the Liberty Counsel, the Obama-era policy would have allowed incoming service members identifying as transgender to enlist if they have been stable in their gender identity for at least 18 months. They could say, I'm a boy or a girl or whatever they wanted. Does that mean what? I don't know. We read or hear about people all the time who found the transition just too difficult or not what they expected, not what they wanted, and they want out. Then, of course, there are the practical implications like biological men showering next to women, male pregnancies, off-duty drag, like in Drag Queen. You got to be cool when you're in the service, but when you're on leave, you go out and you let it all hang out. You get arrested somewhere. Eventually the day will come when most pregnancies are actually created in laboratory settings. You know that, right? Stanford University professor Hank Greeley believes that this would give couples the opportunity to choose embryos that have not inherited any diseases. They're choosing embryos that are not theirs. Within 3 decades, people will no longer be having sex in order to procreate. Remember the old science fiction movies where that's what was going on? These people knew something. Hank Greeley, director of Stanford's Law School's Center of Law and Biosciences, believes the reproductive process will begin with parents choosing from a range of embryos created in the lab using their DNA. The Bible says, this know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. And the biblical remedy? From such turn away. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with divers, that's a multitude of lusts, ever learning, never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. And just as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, that was in Egypt, these were basically witch doctors who mimicked what the miracles of God that Moses did. So do these also resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds reprobate concerning the faith. Here at home, in Seattle, Washington, they are struggling with a social issue and a health issue. And there is no clear path forward. It seems that in the streets, blocks surrounding the King County Superior Court building, these streets are home to most of Seattle's homeless shelters and social service buildings. And guess what? The surrounding sidewalks reek with the stench of urine and excrement. I didn't say that. That was the article. I say, there you go. Progressivism at work. Employees at the courthouse say the area is so unsafe and that several jurors and half a dozen employees have been attacked outside the building. 2 judges are asking the county to clean the area every day. Power washing to get rid of the human waste and stench. Removing bus stop benches to decrease crime. But the council's been unable to come to a conclusion on just how to reduce crime in that area. They did discuss amping up the current cleaning schedule. Of course, not all council members were in favor. One councilman was concerned that this would bring back images of civil rights era when black civil rights activists were hosed by local authorities. You do know that was more than 50 years ago, right? I doubt many of those in and around the courthouse area remember 1964. These are some of the cultural issues we're forced to deal with since we embarked on the counterintuitive effort to be politically correct. One can only wonder what it's going to be next week. In other news, we have an op-ed piece from the Detroit News. Kaylee McKee offers some insight into her generation. She says millennials are in a constant contest to one-up each other in showing tolerance, and when someone or anything stands in their way, they collapse into temper tantrums. My generation is a symptom of the society past generations have built, one characterized by immediate gratification, the breakdown of moral code, and the victim mentality. It's the wreckage of past generations' experience with postmodernism, liberalism, and millennials are trying to wade through it all. Millennials are desperately searching for answers to questions they're afraid to ask, and because our predecessors failed to defend the moral code that once provided clarity, my generation replaced it with the morality of political correctness. And the result is a snowflakeification of an entire generation. What happened? Well, Alasdair MacIntyre is a philosopher, and he offers an opinion in his philosophical book entitled After Virtue. And he wrote this in 1961, by the way. The year he believes is the dawn of the millennial generation. In it, he suggested that the West was built on the Aristotelian moral framework, something which existed over 2,000 years ago. But the Enlightenment period, 1800s, destroyed all that. But it's something that went largely unnoticed and unaccounted for. And the result was that men, Western men, still largely practiced and observed traditional moral values, and did so for generations, but did it without understanding the ideas that underpinned those values. He says it's a dark age where moral clarity and consensus is virtually impossible. The difference today is that the barbarians are not waiting beyond our frontiers. They're already here and they're governing us. And they have for some time. It is our lack of consciousness, I would add busyness, that constitutes the depth of our predicament. He says we're not waiting for Godot, but for another, doubtless very different. We're waiting for St. Benedict. Now, in the play Waiting for Godot, for those of you who are not very into plays, it's a story of two destitute men who keep putting off killing themselves in the hope that tomorrow this unknown person by the name of Godot will show up. What he's supposed to do, I have no idea. But he never does. And St. Benedict, a productive and supposedly miracle-working Roman Catholic monk who lived in the 5th and early 6th century. So somewhere between hopelessness and godliness is where everybody is positioned. It sounds pretty rational, doesn't it? Oops.